Just a recruit, the princess thought. Until the apex predators stepped back, the kingdom of Velaris lay cloaked in mist, as if the morning itself feared to touch the ancient stones of its towers. The walls were tall and white, streaked with ivy and weathered by countless seasons, and the banners of gold and deep blue swayed gently in the cool wind. Beyond the gates, the city pulsed with life, merchants, craftsmen, and guards alike moving with a rhythm that had existed for centuries. But high above, in the royal palace perched like a sentinel over the city, there was a stillness that belonged only to the air of Velaris. Princess Alara stood on the balcony of her chamber, the soft silk of her gown brushing against the stone. Her hands rested lightly on the cold railing as her eyes swept over the courtyard below. There, the royal guards trained under the watchful eyes of their commanders. Young recruits full of ambition and nerves clashed with wooden swords and shouted commands, dreaming of glory and honor. Yet among them, one figure moved differently. Calm, controlled, silent but unmissable, Kale. He was just a recruit, at least in title, yet his movements were precise, his posture commanding without effort. He did not shout or boast. He did not seek attention, yet every swing of his sword, every turn and pivot drew the gaze of those around him. Even the older, more experienced guards could not match his speed, nor did they try. There was something in him, something that set him apart, though no one could name it. Alara tilted her head, curiosity knitting her brow. She had watched many recruits come and go, but Kale stirred something strange in her, a mixture of awe, caution, and something she had not yet named. Her hand clenched lightly around the railing. A prince might have been her choice in games and imagination, yet here was someone entirely unexpected. A man not born into her world, yet already part of its rhythm. Her maid approached quietly, bowing her head. "Your Highness, the council waits for you." They wished to discuss the approaching threat. Alara nodded without turning. "Soon," she murmured. Her gaze remained on Kale, now sparring with another recruit. The clash of wood echoed softly, and in his eyes she saw something that made her stomach tighten, a depth she could not yet understand. The council room smelled of wax and old parchment. Candles flickered along the walls, casting long shadows across the polished stone floor. Queen Althara, her mother, presided over the meeting with the serene authority that had kept Velaris safe for decades. Beside her, generals and advisors spoke in measured tones about reports of incursions at the borders, rumors of dark creatures moving in the forests, and the uneasy silence that had fallen over the neighboring kingdoms. "The scouts report unusual movements along the eastern ridge," said General Corvin, a broad-shouldered man whose voice carried the weight of experience. "The forests there are changing, trees twisted, shadows that do not belong, travelers disappear. Some speak of creatures with eyes like fire." A murmur ran through the room. Alara sat stiffly, listening. Though her heart raced, she remained composed. The weight of responsibility was heavy, and yet it thrilled her. Danger had always held a strange allure, and now it came knocking at their gates. "We must prepare," her mother said, voice firm. "The kingdom will stand as it always has, but we must be vigilant. The shadows are growing bolder, and I fear they will not wait for us to be ready." Alara's gaze shifted to the door as Kale entered, summoned by one of the generals to attend the council as part of a special mission. Even in the grand chamber, he moved with quiet purpose, like a shadow that did not startle the light. He inclined his head briefly to the queen and then to her. Their eyes met, if only for a moment, and Alara felt a strange heat flicker across her chest. It was a fleeting thing, yet impossible to ignore. The discussion continued, but Alara's mind wandered. She thought of Kale, the way he had carried himself among the other recruits, his silence, his skill. How could someone so young and seemingly untethered move with such certainty? What had shaped him? After the council, the princess wandered the corridors of the palace, the stone cold beneath her feet. She had always been drawn to the quiet corners, the spaces where shadows lingered longer and the world outside seemed far away. Her fingers brushed the walls as if seeking comfort from their steady presence. And then, a sound, a soft noise from the courtyard below, stopped her in her tracks. She stepped carefully to the window and looked down. Kale was there, standing at the edge of the training grounds, his eyes scanning the trees that bordered the palace walls. His posture was relaxed, yet alert, and the way he held himself suggested he was ready for anything the shadows might send. And then it happened. A movement almost imperceptible stirred at the tree line. Something glided between the trunks, silent and swift. Before anyone could react, it struck at a young recruit who had been practicing alone. Ilara gasped, her hands gripping the windowsill. Kale was gone in a heartbeat. He moved with a speed that seemed impossible, a shadow among shadows. The creature lunged again, but Kale intercepted it, his blade flashing in the pale morning light. The fight was swift and precise, finished before the others had fully realized what had occurred. The recruit stumbled back, trembling, while Kale stood over the fallen creature. It was no more than a shadow now, dissolving into the mist, leaving behind only the echo of its presence. Ilara's heart raced. He looked up, and for the briefest moment their eyes met again. She could see the faint trace of something dangerous within him, a depth she did not understand, a secret he did not share. And yet there was also protection, a fierce instinct that had saved a life without a word, without ceremony. That evening the princess could not eat. She wandered the palace gardens, the scent of night-blooming flowers heavy in the air. The moonlight fell in silver shafts through the trees, and the world seemed quieter than ever before. A soft step behind her made her turn. Kale was there, standing at the edge of the path, his expression unreadable. "Your Highness," he said, voice low, calm, "the border scouts have reported increased activity. Shadows move faster than before. I recommend you return inside." Ilara shook her head. "I cannot stop thinking about today, about what happened, about you." She cursed the words as soon as they left her mouth, but they had already spoken the truth she could not deny. Kale regarded her silently. There was a long pause, as if he weighed whether he should speak, and then he said, "You should not concern yourself with this. The shadows, they are mine to face." And in his words, Ilara sensed both warning and invitation, a promise and a danger intertwined. The night stretched on, and the palace seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere beyond the walls, unseen, the forest whispered and moved. Kale stood as a silent sentinel, a figure that belonged to darkness and yet to light. And then, at the very edge of the gardens, a shadow darker than the rest stirred. Ilara froze. She could not see its shape clearly, but she felt its gaze. It was intelligent, patient, and aware. Kale moved instantly, stepping between her and the unseen threat. His hand brushed hers briefly, not in warmth, but in grounding and unspoken assurance. The shadow receded, but the tension lingered, coiling around her like a living thing. "Your Highness," he murmured, voice barely more than a whisper, "they are coming. And they will not wait for the dawn." Ilara swallowed, her chest tight with fear and anticipation. "Then I will be ready," she said, her voice firm, though the truth was that she felt anything but. Kale inclined his head slightly, the faintest shadow of a smile touching his lips. "We shall see." And in that moment a bond formed, fragile, uncertain, and electric. The princess who had thought him just a recruit now realized that he was a force unlike any she had ever known. A force she could not ignore and perhaps could not survive without. The mist deepened around the palace. Somewhere in the distance, a creature stirred, its eyes glinting like coals in the dark. The warning had come, whispered across the walls and forests alike. The predators were awake, and even the crown could not protect her from what was coming. Ilara stood alone on the balcony again, staring into the shadows. The night was heavy with secrets, with unseen movements and half-heard whispers. And yet amid the fear there was a strange thrill, a sense that her life, her destiny, was about to shift in ways she could not yet imagine. Somewhere below, Kale moved like a shadow, unseen and waiting, ready to face what the darkness would send. And Ilara, the princess who had thought him just a recruit, felt the first stirrings of a bond that would change them both forever. The night closed in, deep and silent, and the kingdom of Velaris held its breath. The dawn in Velaris broke with a pale light that filtered softly through the palace windows. Princess Ilara had hardly slept. The warning from the raven's letter haunted her thoughts, each word repeating in her mind like a shadow. "The predators are waking. Even the crown will not protect you." She paced the balcony before the sun fully rose, the soft breeze brushing against her skin. Below, Kale was already moving through the training grounds, his figure a steady shadow among the waking city. Even in the early morning, there was a sense of power in the way he walked, a quiet strength that seemed to command the air itself. Ilara's heart ached with curiosity and fear. She could not ignore what she had felt yesterday, the strange mixture of danger and protection that Kale brought wherever he went. She had always been cautious, but now she felt drawn toward him in a way she could not explain. When the council reconvened, Ilara surprised everyone by speaking. Her voice was firm, clear, carrying the authority she had learned to wield beside her mother. "We cannot wait for the shadows to grow stronger," she said. "We must act. I will go with the scouts to the eastern ridge. I will see for myself what threatens Velaris." The council exchanged wary glances. Queen Althara's eyes, usually calm and controlled, flickered with concern. "Ilara, it is too dangerous." "You are the future of Velaris," her mother warned. "I understand, mother," Ilara replied, "but I cannot sit idle while darkness gathers beyond our walls." Kale, standing at the edge of the chamber as if anticipating her words, inclined his head slightly. His voice, low and measured, cut through the murmurs. "If you go, princess, you must be prepared. The shadows are not ordinary. They are cunning, patient, and relentless. I will accompany you." No one spoke further, for Kale's words carried weight. His reputation alone was enough to silence the council. The journey to the eastern ridge began at first light. The path was narrow, winding through dense forest, the air thick with the scent of moss and wet earth. Mist clung to the ground, curling around the roots and stones, making each step uncertain. Ilara walked beside Kale, feeling his presence like a shield, even though she could not see what he sensed in the gloom ahead. "The scouts have not returned," Kale said quietly. "Which means either they fled, or worse." Ilara tightened her grip on the hilt of the dagger she carried. Though it was ceremonial, its weight reminded her that she had trained, that she was capable of more than the court believed. As they delved deeper into the forest, shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting and shifting in ways that made the trees seem alive. A chill ran down her spine, and she wondered if the rumors of cursed creatures were true. She had heard whispers of monsters that could move unseen, of spirits that could enter dreams, but she had always thought them stories to frighten children. Now, walking beside Kale, she began to believe. A sudden movement to their left startled her. Kale's hand shot out, steadying her, but his eyes were already scanning the underbrush. A low growl echoed through the trees, soft but filled with menace. Two figures emerged, spectral and terrible, their eyes glowing like coals. Ilara froze, but Kale stepped forward, his body coiled like a spring ready to strike. "Stay behind me," he commanded softly. The creatures lunged. Kale moved with a speed that made her heart catch in her throat. His blade flashed, striking with precision, cutting through the darkness that seemed almost solid. The creatures recoiled, dissolving into mist, but not before Ilara saw the jagged edges of their forms, twisted and unnatural. She shivered. What are they?" Kale's gaze remained on the shadows, his face calm, almost unreadable. "They are remnants of the curse," he said finally. "Not all that hunts Velaris is alive. Some of it is older than our memories." The words sank into her like stones. "A curse." Kale nodded, his eyes flicking toward her with a seriousness that made her heart pound. "One that follows my bloodline, one that I have fought all my life, and now it stirs again." Ilara felt a shiver of both fear and fascination. She had always been drawn to stories of ancient power, to tales of heroes who battled darkness and survived. And here was one of those heroes, standing before her, not in legend but in flesh and shadow. They continued through the forest, moving cautiously. Kale's senses seemed attuned to every sound. The snap of a twig, the whisper of wind through leaves, even the faintest scent carried on the air. Ilara followed, learning to trust his instincts, though her own fear made each step heavier. Eventually, they reached a clearing where the ruins of an old temple lay half buried in the earth. Stone pillars jutted skyward like broken teeth, covered in moss and vines. A faint glow emanated from the center of the ruins, pulsing with an eerie rhythm that made the ground beneath her feet vibrate slightly. "This is it," Kale said, his voice low. "This is where the curse grows strongest." Ilara stepped closer, drawn to the light, though a part of her urged her to stay back. The relic at the center was unlike anything she had ever seen. A black crystal hovered above a pedestal, twisting slowly, veins of silver tracing through its surface like lightning frozen in time. "It's beautiful," she whispered, unable to tear her eyes away. Kale's gaze was sharp. "Do not be fooled, its beauty is a trap. Its power is alive, and it will try to consume anything that touches it, even me." Ilara's fingers ached to reach out to touch it, but Kale stepped in front of her, his body a protective barrier. "Stay here," he warned. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying whispers that made the hairs on her arms rise. Shadows moved unnaturally around the ruins, coalescing into shapes that were more felt than seen. Ilara's heart raced, but she did not look away. She wanted to understand, to witness the power that Kale faced daily and to be part of it. Kale's eyes softened just slightly as he looked at her. "It is dangerous, Princess. You should not be here. This world is not safe for those who carry the crown, and especially not for those who have hearts too brave for their own good." Alara met his gaze steadily. "And yet here I am. I will not hide behind walls while darkness spreads." He said nothing for a moment, studying her with a mixture of concern and something else she could not name. Then he drew a deep breath and stepped forward, blade in hand, moving toward the relic with the precision of a predator. The shadows surged, forming shapes more solid now, creatures with jagged limbs and eyes like burning coals. Kale did not hesitate. He moved as though the darkness were water, slicing, striking, and evading with a grace that made Alara's breath catch. One creature lunged at her from the edge of the clearing. Instinctively, she raised her dagger. Kale's hand was on hers in an instant, guiding her away, moving her out of harm's way with a gentleness that made her heart thrum painfully. "Trust me," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "You must trust me." She nodded, feeling the truth of his words in every fiber of her being. For the first time, she understood that Kale was more than a recruit, more than a soldier. He was a guardian, a force shaped by shadows, and yet somehow still capable of humanity. The battle with the relic and its guardians lasted only minutes, though it felt like hours. Kale's skill was unmatched, and gradually the shadows began to dissolve, retreating into the mist and soil of the ruined temple. Exhausted but unharmed, he turned to Alara, whose hands were still trembling. "You are safe," he said simply. "For now." Alara's chest rose and fell rapidly. She wanted to speak, to ask him how he had done it, how he could move like that, but no words came. Instead, she simply nodded, understanding in a way that words could never convey. Kale's gaze softened for a fleeting moment. "This is only the beginning," he said. "The shadows are stirring, and not all of them will be as easy to fend off. You must be prepared, Princess. I cannot always be at your side." Alara felt a pang of something she could not name. Fear, yes, but also longing and something deeper, a connection that had grown stronger in the silence between them. The sun began to dip toward the horizon as they made their way back to the palace. The forest seemed quieter now, yet the mist remained, curling around their feet and brushing against their cloaks like the fingers of unseen watchers. When they reached the palace gates, Kale paused. His eyes, usually so guarded, lingered on her with an intensity that made her stomach twist. "Remember what I said," he murmured. "The shadows will not wait for the dawn, and neither will the dangers that follow them." Alara nodded, but she did not speak. Instead, she watched him as he melted into the shadows of the courtyard, silent and unwavering, a force she had only begun to understand. That night, as she lay in her chamber, the image of Kale facing the shadows replayed endlessly in her mind. She felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. Something had shifted within her, something she could not name yet could not ignore. And somewhere deep in the forest, the shadows watched, waiting, patient and eternal, as the Princess of Velaris began to realize that her life and her heart were no longer entirely her own. End of Part 2, cliffhanger. She rose to see a single black feather, tipped with silver, resting on the sill. Beneath it, another folded parchment, its edges faintly glowing. "The forest speaks, Princess. Listen, or you may lose more than your crown." The palace of Velaris was a labyrinth of stone corridors and echoing chambers, where shadows seemed to linger longer than daylight allowed. Princess Alara walked through these halls with purpose, her footsteps soft yet deliberate on the polished marble floors. The warnings she had received from the raven and the cursed forest weighed heavily on her mind, yet she carried herself with the dignity expected of the future queen. Kale had returned to his duties in the training grounds, yet his presence felt like a tether around her thoughts. She could not rid herself of the memory of his movements in the forest, the calm certainty in his eyes, and the quiet strength that had kept her safe. More than once, she had caught herself imagining what secrets lay behind that guarded expression. The court was abuzz with whispers that morning. Nobles murmured about the recent patrol to the eastern ridge, the rumors of Kale's power, and the princess's insistence on venturing into danger alongside a mere recruit. Many of the advisors saw it as reckless. Few understood the bond that had begun to form between them. Queen Althara summoned Alara to the council chambers. The room smelled faintly of candle wax and old parchment, the air thick with authority and expectation. The queen's sharp eyes met her daughter as soon as she entered. "You risk much by involving yourself with him," Althara said quietly, though every word carried weight. "Kale is not like the others. There are forces in the forest you cannot comprehend. Forces that may follow him even into these walls." Alara's heart skipped. She had long known there was something unusual about Kale, something tied to the darkness he seemed to understand instinctively. Yet the thought of keeping her distance felt impossible. "I understand, Mother," she replied, "but I cannot remain idle while shadows gather. If we act together, perhaps we can prepare the kingdom before they strike." The queen's lips pressed into a thin line. "Be cautious. The world outside these walls is not forgiving, and neither are some within." Alara left the council with a weight on her shoulders, yet a determination that no caution could shake. She made her way to the training grounds, seeking Kale. The sun had risen fully now, casting long shadows across the stone and grass. Kale moved among the recruits, his presence calm yet commanding, every action precise and deliberate. When their eyes met, she felt the same pull as before, the strange mix of danger, trust, and curiosity that seemed to coil around them like a living thing. "Princess," Kale said softly as he approached her, "you should not wander the palace alone today. There are eyes everywhere, and not all of them are loyal." "I do not need protection, Kale," she replied firmly. "I need your counsel." He studied her silently, then inclined his head. "Very well. But remember, the court has its own shadows, and some of them wear faces as friendly as your own." They walked together through the palace, moving past gilded halls and tapestries that depicted generations of kings and queens. Kale's knowledge of the palace seemed instinctive, as if he had learned not just its corridors but its secrets. He spoke little, but his observations were sharp, each word carrying a weight that Alara could not ignore. "You move like a shadow," she said finally, unable to hide her curiosity. "How do you see what others do not?" Kale paused, looking toward the tall windows that framed the morning sky. "I have lived in darkness longer than in light," he said quietly. "It teaches you to listen, to anticipate, and to survive. Not all shadows are evil, Princess. Some are merely watching." Alara absorbed his words, the tension in her chest easing slightly. She had always believed the world was simple, black and white, right and wrong. Kale was teaching her that it was far more complex, and that sometimes understanding the darkness was the only way to face it. That evening, the palace buzzed with preparations for the midwinter celebration, a festival of lights, music, and ceremony designed to strengthen alliances and lift the spirits of the kingdom. Yet the joy was fragile, a thin veneer over the unease that clung to Velaris like morning mist. Alara stood in the high balcony of her chamber, watching the lanterns flicker in the courtyard below. Her thoughts wandered to Kale, to the forest, and to the relic that had pulsed with dark magic. She knew the danger was not gone, it had only retreated, waiting for the next moment to strike. A soft knock at her door drew her attention. Kale entered, his movements silent and fluid, as if the shadows themselves allowed him passage. "You should not wander the palace alone," he said, echoing his earlier words. "I needed to see the festival preparations," she replied. "Even in dark times there is beauty to be found." Kale's gaze softened, and for a moment the stoic recruit seemed less a shadow and more a person, a man shaped by hardship yet still capable of tenderness. "Beauty is fleeting," he said, "but sometimes it gives us strength." They walked to the balcony together, the cool night air brushing against their faces. The lanterns below swayed gently, casting dancing lights across the courtyard. Alara's heart stirred at the sight, yet her thoughts returned to the darkness lurking beyond the walls. "You have faced shadows all your life," she said finally, her voice quiet. "Have you ever been afraid?" Kale did not answer immediately. He looked out toward the distant hills where the forest began, and his jaw tightened. "Fear is not weakness," he said at last. "It is a reminder of what is important, and I fear losing what I care for." Alara's breath caught. The words were simple, yet they carried an unspoken depth that made her pulse quicken. She felt the weight of his trust, his vulnerability, and the bond between them tightened, invisible but unbreakable. The next days passed with growing tension. Rumors circulated through the palace, strange events in the city, missing travelers, and whispers of Kale's past. Some nobles used the fear to undermine Alara, questioning her judgment and her closeness to a recruit. Alara faced them with a calm she had not known she possessed. "Kale is not just a recruit," she said firmly during one council meeting. He is loyal to this kingdom, and he has saved lives beyond counting. Judging him by gossip will serve no one. Some murmured in agreement, others in doubt, yet the princess's words carried authority. She felt a strange pride in her growing confidence, even as she knew the dangers were far from over. One night, Kale sought her out in the gardens, where moonlight glimmered across the fountains and statues. The air was still, heavy with the scent of flowers and damp earth. "Elara," he said softly, his voice blending with the whispering leaves. "There is something you must know about the curse. It is tied to my bloodline, a predator of shadow bound by a choice: protect or consume. My family, my people, have always been hunted by this darkness, and now so are you." Elara felt a chill run through her. "What do you mean?" Kale's eyes met hers, steady and intense. "The shadows that you see, that you feel, they are not mindless. They are drawn to me and by extension to you. I cannot always keep them away, but if we face them together, perhaps we can survive." Her hands trembled slightly, though she forced herself to stand tall. "Then we will face them together," she said. "I am not afraid of the shadows, Kale, not if you are by my side." For a moment the stoic recruit seemed human, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed. He inclined his head, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. Weeks passed, and the court's tensions continued to rise. Elara and Kale trained together daily, preparing for the threats that lurked beyond the palace walls. In the quiet moments, away from watchful eyes, their trust deepened. Kale began to reveal fragments of his past, the loss of his homeland, the curse that had shaped him, and the long years of solitude he had endured. Elara listened, her heart aching for the boy who had grown into a shadowed warrior, yet never lost his humanity entirely. "You carry too much," she said one evening as they stood overlooking the city from a tower. "You do not have to face it alone." Kale's gaze softened, yet a shadow flickered across his eyes. "I have no choice," he said quietly, "but having you here changes something. I do not fear for myself as I once did. I fear losing you." The words struck Elara like lightning. Her pulse quickened, her chest tight. She had never heard such vulnerability from him, nor had she imagined that the man who moved like a shadow could carry such care. And then a sound from below drew their attention. Figures moved in the courtyard, silent, purposeful. Shadows that did not belong to the night, edges glowing faintly, shapes that twisted unnaturally. Kale drew his blade instantly, positioning himself between Elara and the threat. "They have followed me," he said, his voice low and controlled. "We must move, now." Elara's heart pounded as they descended the tower, moving swiftly and silently through the corridors. The shadows swirled around them, a living presence, testing, probing. Kale struck with precision, clearing their path, yet the danger felt relentless. They emerged into the courtyard just as the creatures began to coalesce into larger forms. Kale's movements were a dance of shadow and steel, each strike pushing them back, each step a demonstration of skill and experience. Elara watched, awestruck and terrified. She understood now that Kale was more than a recruit, more than a soldier. He was a guardian, a force forged in darkness, yet capable of protecting light. When the last shadow dissipated into the mist, Kale turned to her, his expression calm yet tired. "This is only the beginning," he said. "The court, the shadows, they are all connected. You must be ready, princess. The world is not as it seems." Elara nodded, her heart full of fear, hope, and something else she could not yet name. Together they stood in the moonlight, the city below them quiet. The night holding its breath, the air above Velaris was thick with anticipation. Clouds hung low, and the wind whispered through the palace towers, carrying a chill that made even the bravest soldiers pause. The city streets, usually lively at dawn, were quiet now, the citizens sensing an unease they could not name. Even the banners seemed to shiver in the breeze. Princess Elara stood atop the highest tower, her eyes scanning the horizon. The eastern ridge where the cursed forest began lay shrouded in mist and shadow. Kale had warned her, the darkness was stirring, and this time it would not wait for the dawn. He appeared silently at her side, his cloak brushing the stone. "They are coming," he said simply. His voice was calm, but beneath it lay the weight of certainty. "The apex predators have been summoned. They are unlike anything we have faced." Elara swallowed hard, gripping the railing. How can we fight them?" Kale's eyes, dark and unwavering, met hers. "Together. And with everything we have." The palace courtyard became a battlefield of preparation. Soldiers drilled relentlessly, archers tested their aim, and the mages worked in concentrated circles, casting wards and charms over the walls. Every corner of the city was reinforced, every gate guarded. Yet even amid the clamor of readiness, Alara felt a strange, heavy silence pressing on her. It was as if the city itself held its breath, waiting for the coming storm. Kale moved among the troops, his presence commanding respect without a word. Soldiers followed his directions instinctively, trusting him in ways they did not trust others. His blade gleamed in the pale light, and every motion hinted at the power he had kept hidden for so long. Alara watched him, her heart pounding. The man she had thought of as just a recruit was now the kingdom's shield. And yet she could sense the cost it demanded. The tension coiled in his shoulders, the brief flicker of shadow that danced across his eyes when he was certain no one was looking. The first wave of the apex predators struck at dusk. From the forest they emerged, creatures taller than men with limbs that twisted unnaturally, eyes that glowed like molten silver. Their presence was suffocating, a living darkness that seemed to devour light itself. The ground trembled beneath their steps, and a low, resonant growl rolled through the courtyard. Kale stepped forward, his blade catching the fading sunlight. "Defend the walls," he commanded. His voice carried the authority of someone who had faced death countless times, yet never faltered. The soldiers formed ranks, shields raised, spears braced. The mages' wards shimmered in the twilight, and Alara's heart raced as the first predator lunged. It moved with terrifying speed, a shadow of sinew and teeth, yet Kale was there, cutting a path through the darkness with a precision that was almost supernatural. Alara watched, torn between awe and fear. Every strike he made seemed effortless, yet she could see the strain hidden beneath his calm. He was not invincible. He was human, and yet more than human. A predator lunged at the wall where she stood. Instinctively, Alara raised her dagger, but Kale was there in an instant, pushing her behind him. His eyes met hers, a silent warning and a promise entwined. "Stay close," he said. The battle raged, the courtyard a blur of steel, shadow, and magic. Kale moved like water, striking, dodging, and protecting. The predators were relentless, each more cunning than the last. Some were drawn to the wards, others to the soldiers, but all seemed to sense Kale's presence, as if they recognized him as both predator and prey. At one point, a creature broke through the outer line, heading straight for Alara. She froze, unable to move. Kale's hand gripped her arm, yanking her aside as he met the predator's attack head-on. The clash of his blade against its claws sent sparks into the night. "Alara," he shouted over the roar of the battle. "Do not look away, you must see how to survive." Her breath caught, but she nodded. She watched him, absorbing every movement, every choice, every instant of courage. And in that moment she realized something she had not admitted before. She trusted him completely. Hours passed like minutes. The apex predators pressed their assault, but Kale's skill, combined with the soldiers' courage and the mages' wards, began to turn the tide. Yet Kale's movements grew slower, more deliberate. She noticed a shadow flicker across his eyes, an inner struggle she could not name. After dispatching another wave of creatures, Kale leaned against a wall, breathing heavily. Alara rushed to his side. "Kale, are you?" "I am fine," he said, but his voice was tight, controlled. He straightened, pushing the exhaustion aside. "They are testing me, they know my nature, the curse within me stirs when they are near." Alara's eyes widened. "The curse, the one you spoke of," he nodded. "Yes. Every time I use my full strength, a part of it wakes. If I give in completely, I may not return as the man you know." Her chest tightened. "Then we fight together, I will not leave your side." Kale's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "You must be careful. The shadows are patient. They will not just test me, they will test you." The final assault came at midnight. The largest predator yet emerged from the forest, a towering figure with wings of shadow and eyes that burned like silver fire. Its roar shook the walls and made the lanterns flicker. The city held its breath. Kale stepped forward, his blade gleaming in the moonlight. His movements were faster, sharper, more precise than ever before. He struck with the grace of someone who had lived with darkness for too long, each strike pushing back the predator, each movement a testament to his mastery. But the creature was relentless. It lunged again and again, and Kale's energy began to wane. His eyes flickered with a strange light, the shadow within him rising, threatening to overwhelm his humanity. Alara, seeing the struggle, stepped forward despite the danger. "Kale," she shouted, "you are not alone." His gaze found hers. In that instant, something shifted. The shadow within him hesitated, as if recognizing the bond they shared. Kale drew a deep breath, channeling not just his strength but his trust in her, his care for her, and the promise he had made to protect the kingdom and the princess. With a final, breathtaking strike, he vanquished the predator, its shadow dissolving into mist. The courtyard fell silent, the only sound the wind rustling through the banners. Kale stood, breathing heavily, sweat and shadows mingling on his skin. He was victorious, but he had paid a cost. His eyes held a depth of exhaustion and something darker, something lingering from the shadow he had contained. Alara ran to him, taking his hand. "Kale, you did it," she whispered. "You saved us all." He looked at her, his face calm yet marked by the struggle within. "Yes, but not without cost. The curse, it is not gone, and it will test me again." Her heart ached, but she held his hand tightly. "Then we will face it together. Whatever comes, we will not let it take you." For a long moment they stood in the moonlight, the bond between them solidified by battle, trust, and shared danger. The city of Velaris, though scarred and shaken, was safe, for now. The next morning the palace stirred with quiet celebration. The soldiers praised Kale's skill, the mages marveled at the wards, and the citizens whispered tales of the shadowed warrior who had protected the princess. Yet Kale did not celebrate. He remained quiet, moving through the halls like a shadow himself, as if the victory had only reminded him of the darkness he carried within. Alara sought him out in the training grounds. He was alone, practicing with his blade, each movement a mixture of grace and latent power. She approached cautiously. "You fought well," she said softly. Kale paused, sheathing his sword. "We fought well. Victory is not mine alone." Alara smiled faintly. "And yet you carried the heaviest burden." He looked at her, and for the first time his expression betrayed the faintest hint of vulnerability. "Perhaps, but having you by my side makes the burden lighter." Her heart stirred. She realized now that Kale was more than protector. He was a companion, a force she had come to rely on, and perhaps more. Yet even as she felt warmth in his words, she sensed the shadow that still lingered, the danger that had not yet passed. As night fell once more, Alara stood on the balcony, looking toward the forest. The apex predators had been defeated, but their presence lingered in the air, a reminder that darkness never truly disappeared. Kale stood beside her, silent but steady, a shadow she had learned to trust and a man whose strength was now entwined with her own courage. "The danger is not gone," he said quietly. "I know," she replied, "but I am not afraid, not with you." He inclined his head slightly, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Together, they watched the moonlight touch the horizon, knowing that the bond they had forged in battle would guide them through the trials yet to come. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the kingdom of Velaris in shades of blood and fire. Shadows lengthened across the cobbled streets, curling around towers and rooftops like fingers of an unseen hand. Within the palace, Princess Alara moved with a quiet purpose. Her hands rested on the cold stone of the balcony, and she watched the distant eastern ridge, where the forest thickened and darkness lingered like a living thing. Kale appeared silently at her side, his presence both grounding and alarming. Even now, after all they had faced together, he seemed otherworldly, half shadow, half man, every movement precise, every breath controlled. "They are coming," he said, voice low and calm. "The apex predators have sensed the stir of my bloodline. They will not wait." Alara turned to him, her chest tightening. "How will we face them?" Kale's dark eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "Together. We have prepared the soldiers, the wards, and our courage, but we must act swiftly. They are patient, intelligent, and relentless." The palace courtyard was alive with frantic preparation. Soldiers drilled in tight formations, shields clashing and spears braced, while mages wove glowing wards around the gates and towers. The scent of incense and sweat filled the air. Yet even amid the controlled chaos, Alara felt the pulse of unease, the invisible pressure of something immense waiting in the forest. Kale moved through the troops with calm authority. He did not shout. He did not gesture unnecessarily. And yet every soldier instinctively followed his direction. His presence alone carried weight, his skill evident even to those who had never seen him fight. Alara watched him, her heartbeat thrumming in her ears. He was not simply a recruit, nor even a warrior. He was a force shaped by shadows, a protector whose life had been forged in the crucible of darkness. The first predators appeared at twilight, emerging from the eastern forest like living nightmares. They were taller than men, with jagged limbs and eyes glowing silver, moving with a fluidity that defied natural laws. Their growls rolled through the courtyard, vibrating the stone floors and shaking the banners above. Kale drew his blade, its edge catching the fading sunlight. "Defend the walls," he commanded. His voice carried the authority of a man who had faced death countless times, and the soldiers obeyed without hesitation. The predators surged forward, their speed terrifying, their claws striking sparks against the wards and shields. Kale moved like water, striking with precision, deflecting attacks, guiding soldiers to safety. Every movement seemed effortless, yet Alara noticed the strain beneath his calm, the shadow within him stirring with each strike. A creature lunged at her from the edge of the courtyard. She froze, terror rooting her in place. Kale was there in an instant, pushing her behind him, his blade flashing. His eyes met hers, a silent promise, "I will protect you." The battle raged through the night. Predators struck in waves, each more cunning than the last. Kale's movements were a blur, his blade slicing through the darkness, deflecting, parrying, and striking, yet he was not invincible. Alara could see the effort etched into his stance, the faint flicker of shadow in his eyes when he struck with too much force. She remembered his warning, "The curse within me stirs when danger is near," and now she could see it. A thin veil of darkness traced his limbs, a shadow that mirrored the predators, feeding on his energy, testing his control. "Alara," Kale shouted above the roar, "stay behind me, watch and learn." Her breath caught, but she obeyed, keeping close to him. She watched his every move, absorbing not just the technique, but the intention, the awareness, the anticipation, the precision born of years spent dancing with darkness. Hours passed like moments. The soldiers fought bravely, and the wards held, yet the apex predators were relentless. One massive creature, taller than any other, emerged from the forest edge, wings of shadow unfurling, eyes like molten silver piercing the night. It let out a roar that shook the walls and sent birds scattering into the sky. Kale faced it head-on, his movements precise, almost rhythmic, a deadly dance of shadow and steel. The creature lunged, and Kale met it with a strike that sent sparks into the air. He pivoted, twisted, and struck again, each motion a calculated counter, but Alara could see the strain deepening. The shadow within him began to rise, a flickering darkness along his limbs and face, coiling like smoke. His eyes glowed faintly, silver at the edges. She knew then the full cost of his power. The curse within him was awakening, testing his control, daring him to succumb. "Alara," he shouted, "do not look away, focus." She nodded, focusing on him, on the flow of his movements, on the rhythm that guided both defense and strike. And in that moment she realized something profound. Kale's power was not merely physical. It was trust, courage, and will made manifest. The final confrontation approached. Kale faced the largest predator, the creature now circling like a shadowed sun, wings spread, claws ready. The soldiers formed lines, but all eyes were on the two figures in the center of the courtyard, the predator and the man who had mastered shadows themselves. Kale's breathing was steady, though his body betrayed the toll of continuous combat. The shadow within him coiled tighter, threatening to consume, yet he did not falter. Alara's heart pounded as she watched him channel not only his skill but his care for her, for the kingdom, for the life he had chosen to protect. With a series of fluid movements, Kale struck the predator in precise points, each blow weakening it, each strike pushing back the darkness. The creature's roar became a hiss as it faltered, its wings folding, eyes dimming. Finally, with one last controlled strike, Kale sent it sprawling into the ground. The shadow dissipated, leaving the courtyard bathed in the silver light of the moon. Alara ran to him, her hands trembling as she grasped his. "Kale, you did it. You saved us all." He looked at her, exhaustion and shadow flickering in his eyes. "Yes, but not without cost. The curse within me stirs every time I wield this power, and it will come again. I cannot hide it." Her voice was firm, unwavering. "Then we will face it together. Whatever comes, we will not let it take you." Kale's expression softened, the faintest shadow of a smile touching his lips. He had faced darkness all his life, but never had he felt such trust, such connection. The next morning, the palace awoke to quiet celebration. The soldiers spoke in hushed tones of the shadowed warrior who had protected the princess. Mages marveled at the wards and the skill required to keep the apex predators at bay. Yet Kale remained in the shadows, moving silently, aware that victory was only temporary. Alara sought him in the training grounds. He was alone, practicing with his blade, each movement both graceful and deadly. She approached softly. "You fought brilliantly," she said. Kale sheathed his sword slowly. We fought, Princess. The victory is ours together. She smiled faintly, and yet the weight of it is yours alone. His eyes softened, revealing a glimpse of vulnerability. Perhaps, but your presence, it gives me strength, courage I did not know I had. Her heart stirred. In the moonlight, they stood close, the air heavy with the unspoken bond formed in battle, trust, and shared danger. As night fell once more, Alara looked toward the forest. The apex predators had been defeated, yet the shadows lingered like smoke in the air. Kale's figure stood beside her, silent, steady, and formidable. The danger is not gone, he said quietly. I know, she replied, but I am not afraid, not with you. He inclined his head, the faintest smile lingering. Together, they watched the moonlight stretch across the city, knowing that the bond forged in the darkness would guide them through trials yet to come. End of Part 4, Cliffhanger. A shadow darker than any they had faced moved deliberately, silent and immense. Even he, master of shadows, tensed. Alara followed his gaze. A whisper seemed to ride the wind. The darkness is patient, Princess. The crown will demand more, and the shadows have only begun to rise.